History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of Oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 502nd episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be featuring the USS Salem, which was suggested by Jared Rang, and he did such a good job suggesting it that we actually went to it.
We sure did.
We were on this trip last year at this same time, so we got to visit this wonderful cruiser. We're looking forward to sharing it with you, and Jared's going to join us for it as well.
Looking forward to sharing this with everyone.
Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the spooktacular crew Jennifer, Sam, and Anne with an E.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now this moment in Oddity.
Magnets can be a fun thing to play with when you are young. The opposite poles on small magnets pushing away from each other or grabbing different metals and comparing the strengths of the pole can be entertaining. Even sweeping a magnet through sand to see what particles may attach to the magnet can be interesting. But what if insects could detect the Earth's magnetic poles? Let me introduce you to the magnetic termites of Australia. Now, these insects cannot be picked up and stuck onto your refrigerator like a traditional magnet, but what is special about them is that their mounds orientate so that the thinnest points are always formed north to south, and they are only found in the Northern Territory of Australia. This method of architecture reduces the termite mound's exposure to direct heat from the sun, thus keeping the colony more consistently at their optimal temperatures. There have been scientific studies that revealed that the termites are able to use subtle changes in daylight as well as the Earth's magnetic poles to determine their mound's architecture. Magnets can be fascinating, but insects using the magnetic poles of the Earth to benefit their survival certainly is odd.
Are you afraid of the dark?
And now, this month in history.
In the month of August, on the 6th in 1890, pitcher Cy Young made his major league debut. His birth name was Denton True Young, but the nickname of Cy was established due to his fastball pitches, which left the fences looking like a cyclone had hit them. This led the press to give him the moniker of Cy. In 1889, he began his professional baseball career in the minors with the Tri-State League in Canton, Ohio. He was quickly brought up to the majors to sign with the Cleveland Spiders, which had moved from the American Association to the National League just the year before. During his debut game, Young pitched a 3-hit, 8-1 win over the Chicago Colts. At the time, Cy was known for the power behind his hard-throwing pitches, and according to his longtime catcher, Chief Zimmer, he would oftentimes put a piece of beefsteak inside his catcher's glove to give him some extra padding against Cy's fastball. That's one way to tenderize a steak. Young continued to excel and play for the major leagues until 1911. He passed away on November 4th, 1955. And during his baseball career, established many pitching records. To this day, the Cy Young Award is bestowed annually in both the American and National League.
The USS Salem was the flagship of the 6th Fleet and is nicknamed the Sea Witch. She was first launched in 1947 as a naval cruiser and was fortunate to never see any battle. But that didn't keep her from being linked to death, with reports of onboard deaths ranging from 75 to 100. And that has left ghosts on this now floating museum in Quincy, Massachusetts, that we had the opportunity to explore when we visited Salem in August of 2022, as Diane said. Join us for the history and hauntings of the USS Salem. Hey, Jared, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, Jared, we're excited to talk to you about the USS Salem. We actually had no idea about this ship until you said that you'd wanted to go visit it. And we're like, oh, yeah, that'll be kind of cool. We've been to a few battleships and that kind of thing to see it. And we had no idea that it was haunted until you told us.
Yeah, I think I just found out that it was haunted right before that trip. I had known about the Salem and, I knew about her sister ships, which saw more action than she did. But the little that she did experience, caused a lot of stuff to happen and caused a lot of people to unfortunately die on board the ship.
Right.
Quincy is a suburb of Boston that was originally settled by the Massachusetts indigenous people. They'd cleared many trees from the land that they called Passanegesset, which means little neck of land. This made it suitable for farming, and Europeans settled in 1625, naming it Mount Wollaston for their leader. The next leader of the colony changed the name to Merrimount, meaning hill by the sea. Quincy became the new name and was incorporated in 1792. The name is in honor of Colonel John Quincy, the grandfather of Abigail Adams. Now, you've probably noticed I just said Quincy, and I've been saying Quincy when talking about the actual city. That is because residents of Quincy actually pronounce it as Quincy. So we will be pronouncing it like a local.
Oh, very good.
The town became a shipbuilding center. Many famous warships were built at the Four River Shipyard, and one of these was the USS Salem.
We started our visit to Quincy, Massachusetts, with breakfast at a place called McKay's.
It was good, too.
It was so good.
And it was packed. This was definitely a locals hangout.
Yeah, it was family run.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, you could tell because it was like young kids were bussing the tables and...
A lot of them had very similar facial features,
yes,
too, so... When we left the restaurant, we noticed two very old historic homes right across the street. Imagine our excitement when we found out that they were once the homes where Presidents John Adams and John Quincy Adams were born. John Adams was born at the rear of the lot in 1735, and John Quincy Adams was born in the house that was on the corner in 1767. John Adams drafted the Massachusetts State Constitution at that house. That document would serve as a model for the United States Constitution. John Adams wasn't actually that into politics. He once wrote, "I should have thought myself the happiest man in the world if I could have retired in my little hut and 40 acres and lived on potatoes and seaweed."
I kind of feel the same way, although I wouldn't want to live on potatoes and seaweed.
Yeah, same. That little hut was actually a fairly nice-sized 2-story wooden house.
Yeah, that was just so cool because we're like, there's a big historical sign outside of those houses across the street and they look very old. I wonder what that is.
Yeah, I think I noticed it when we were walking into the restaurant.
So when we left, we trotted across the street. We're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was here. And then I'm like, is that why this is called Quincy? The things we learn on road trips. But that was one of our happy little accidents we had on that trip.
And we had many.
We did. It was great.
It was a great trip.
Kelly, our son Jared is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to understanding the types and classes of warships. For you and I, when we come into a town, we're like looking around, is there a cemetery we can go visit? And we're going to hit at least one of them. For Jared, if there's a warship somewhere around, he's going to hit that.
Exactly.
So we literally took a road trip up to Salem last year, and the main point of that trip was to see the USS Salem. And we just hit things along the way. And of course, it's nice that it's near Salem because he actually also wanted to see Salem too. And you'd never been.
Right.
So it was like, well, then we'll go and hit Salem at the same time.
It was a whirlwind trip, but we got a lot fit into the whole thing.
The thing that was really cool about having you on the ship with us is a lot of battleships or carriers, they'll turn them into museums after they've decommissioned them. And so that's what's happened to the Salem, but they've actually turned it into a museum for, I would say, just naval history in general. And I had no idea. I always thought, okay, there's battleships and then there's carriers and that's it. And talking to you, it was like, oh no, there's different types. There's destroyers and cruisers. Could you kind of explain what the differences are between all those?
Yeah, so the Salem is a heavy cruiser, which it was the second largest heavy cruiser that we had created ever at that point. The only ones bigger than that were the Alaska. A battleship is meant to, go and fight other large capital ships, which did not see a ton of use in World War II because carriers were the new thing. Carriers were carrying the airplanes, and they were way, way, way more effective than the battleships were. So they were the most important ship that was used in World War II. Then there were destroyers, which often, accompanied these carriers, and they would go and target other ships that were trying to attack the big carriers, and they protect them. That's also what light cruisers and heavy cruisers did too. They would accompany these big carriers, protect them from enemy aircraft, enemy ships, lots of enemy submarines.
When they say there's different classes of ships, what does that mean?
A class of ship is basically ships that are built with certain characteristics in mind. The Iowa class, there were 4 Iowa class ships, the Iowa, the Wisconsin, the Missouri, and then the New Jersey. All of them had the same specifications in terms of, how large the ship was, what kind of armament the ship was carrying, how many people the ship was able to, have on board. And so the Des Moines class, there were 3 of them, the Des Moines, the Salem, and the Newport News. They were all built pretty much exactly the same.
That's really cool because when we were down there looking at all the different ships, it's like they had it set up in rows. Like it was this class was the Iowa class, and then there was this class in like the Alaska or whatever. And I just thought it was really cool. How did they choose how they were going to name the classes? Do you know why they pick certain states or whatever to name them?
I don't really. I know in general that they used states for battleships. Battleships were named after states. Cruisers were named after cities. And then destroyers, I believe they were named after people. I'm not 100% sure on that one, though. The first main ship with heavily armed, big guns, big armor was, I think, the HMS Dreadnought. I don't know for sure about that, but in World War I, there were these class of ships called dreadnoughts after the very first one, the Dreadnought. These had huge guns, huge armor, and in World War I, we built the most powerful dreadnought, which was the only one to be in existence right now, the Texas, the USS Texas. It's the only dreadnought still around, and it's kind of like the precursor to battleships. The United States, off of that, they built these giant, fat battleships that barely fit through the Panama Canal. Some of them didn't fit through the Panama Canal. And then we kind of moved towards ships that could fit, but were much, much faster. So the Iowa, while it's still huge, it was very, very quick. It was able to get up and going really fast.
So what did you think of getting to see the USS Salem in person?
It was really cool. It was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. I think maybe it was sitting higher out of the water than it normally does. You can kind of see the water line on the ship when you're walking up, so maybe that's what made it seem bigger. But it seemed really large in comparison to the USS Iowa, which is right around, I think, 100 feet longer than that. But it didn't seem like it. It seemed like it was every bit as big as an Iowa.
Especially when you're inside of it, because it's just like you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. And there's this area and that area and you go up and down and they all feel very similar to each other.
Yeah, I think that one was probably the most open ship that I've been on besides the Midway. The Iowa, they've got more of like a path that they want you to take to see stuff on the ship, whereas the Salem is just you can basically go wherever you want to go and see whatever you want to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that you point that out because I hadn't really thought about it before, but I was like, yeah, every time we've been anywhere, they're like, okay, you can't go past this section, or there'll be ropes, that'll say this is designated, you can't go here. Even when we went on the Queen Mary, we were able to go into a lower area where you normally can't go, but it was just because we were on a tour. When we got on board, they're like, do you guys want to do a tour or you just want to self-guide? And we're like, oh, we're fine doing the self-guided. And it was like, okay, go ahead and go.
There you go.
Everywhere.
Off you go. Yeah, the USS North Carolina, when we did that investigation, definitely was bigger, and we had access to a lot of different locations that you wouldn't normally, but the Salem was really unique. I really enjoyed it.
Well, and it definitely needs a lot of love. I don't think I'd
Yes.
ever seen a ship that felt kind of like the Earth is taking it back a little bit. It's got all the moss that's growing up on the deck. And
Right. Yeah.
so it's got a lot of work it needs to have done, but it was really cool to be on there.
The USS Salem was ordered in June of 1943 and had its keel laid down on July 4th of 1945 at the Four River Shipyard by the Bethlehem Steel Company and measured over 716 feet when completed. The ship was named Salem in honor of Salem, Massachusetts, and was the third ship to bear that name. The Salem was launched on the 25th of March in 1947 and commissioned at the Boston Navy Yard on May 14th, 1949. Captain John C. Daniel was in command from the beginning until February 1950. Her first trip was to Guantanamo Bay for training and shakedown exercises, and the Salem would make so many trips to and from Guantanamo Bay that sailors started calling her the Gitmo Express. Captain Edmund B. Taylor took over as commander in 1950 and guided the ship to the Mediterranean to begin her first tour as the 6th Fleet flagship. The Salem stayed for a few months and was relieved by the Newport News in September 1950.
And basically, a shakedown is the final critical period following a ship's construction before it goes out to sea. And these tests confirm the combined operational and material readiness of a Navy ship and her crew. When I hear shakedown, I think you're trying to go after somebody for some money.
Same.
Are they going to Guantanamo Bay to get some money?
The biggest, most notable things about the Salem was the guns on the Salem were a form of automatic firing guns. They did not require people to be there, so it can shoot a large amount of lead. It had 8-inch shells that it was shooting, and it could shoot tons and tons of lead very, very quickly.
So almost like a machine gun, it sounds like, but, on a larger scale. Not as fast as a machine gun, but
I think each barrel was like shooting 10 per minute, 10 shells per minute, which is a ton of lead. Yep.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to see how it would have performed in actual war.
Exactly.
How well it fired and all that stuff, and how well it held up against being fired upon. That was a lot of effort put into it, and then they didn't really get to see its full potential.
Yep.
The Salem would return to the Mediterranean for 7 deployments as fleet flagship. This would take her to ports in Malta, Italy, France, Greece, Turkey, Lebanon, and Algeria. It's a regular Mediterranean cruise. The Salem spent a few weeks in Boston for repairs and then joined the Atlantic Fleet for maneuvers in January of 1951. She was christened the Pride of the Fleet and received the Fleet Battle Readiness Pennant after a competition within the Atlantic Fleet. In November of 1951, the ship received her 4th commander, Captain William K. Romisser. By February of 1952, the Salem was back in the Mediterranean and taking part in Exercise Beehive 2 with military units from Britain, Italy, France, and Greece. These exercises were to test Malta's air and coastal defense. It was back to Boston after this, and then back to the Mediterranean for her 4th deployment, which involved Exercise Weldfest, another NATO exercise involving intensive air and sea action between more than 100,000 troops. Ooh, that's a lot. To test the effectiveness of the West plans for the defense of southeastern Europe and the Turkish Straits at the time. Yeah, it's interesting that the Salem never really saw any battles, but it sure did a lot of stuff. I mean, it went down to Guantanamo Bay, it went over to the Mediterranean, and as you were saying, over in the Mediterranean, they had, an earthquake on one of the islands there, one of the Greek islands, and they ended up bringing the Salem over to it so that they could use it like a hospital, and then eventually it kind of became a floating morgue, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there were, I don't know for sure, I think there were 400 people that were brought on board. The Salem was there 4 days before any other ships got there, so it was basically a floating morgue. They put people in the freezer on board that ship. I think a total throughout all its history, 100 people died while on the ship. And that was from the earthquake. That was from the explosions on a couple other ships that happened. And the Salem just happened to be around, so they'd bring on people from these other ships that had these accidents, and they tried to save them. Not everyone made it, though.
I guess they decided the ship was a good place to die.
I guess. I mean, at least they were there to help. So let's share some details about those incidents. On August 12, 1953, the Ionian earthquake hit the southern Ionian islands of Greece, measuring 7.3 on the Richter scale.
That is a big earthquake.
Sure is. Several other earthquakes would also hit in the month of August, leaving nearly every home on the island of Kefalonia leveled. In the end, 600 people were killed and most of the survivors moved elsewhere. The Salem was the first American ship to arrive on the scene, and she became a floating hospital. The ship also provided relief supplies until her stock ran low just 4 days later. Death toll numbers for victims who died on the Salem range from 75 to 100. So basically, the Salem was a floating morgue during that time. She was relieved by the Des Moines as flagship on October 9, 1953. She was supposed to return to her home port of Boston for repairs, but instead went to the Brooklyn shipyard to get her radar upgraded. When she arrived, she was docked next to the pier and another ship was tied up to her. A fire broke out on the other ship, which was a lake cruiser. The fire was tamped down quickly, but some men had been injured and were moved to the hospital on board the other ship. As the fire crews were gathering up their gear, a 5-inch ammo magazine detonated. That explosion took much of the hospital with it. So the men injured in the fire and explosion were brought over to the Salem, and 7 of them died on board. The Salem returned to Boston on October 24th for an overhaul.
The years 1954 and 1955 had the Salem traveling from Boston to Guantanamo Bay to the Mediterranean, where there were more war games with the Atlantic Fleet. So you can see this is its trajectory. It's always Boston, Guantanamo Bay, Mediterranean, bouncing between those locations. The cruiser left Boston on February 16, 1956, to conduct training exercises at Guantanamo Bay in preparation for a 20-month cruise as the permanent flagship of the Commander 6th Fleet. After the exercises, Salem returned to Boston briefly and then headed over to the Mediterranean on May 1, 1956. The Suez Crisis broke out while she was on her way, and the cruiser was diverted to Rhodes in the eastern Mediterranean, where she joined the fleet as flagship. The Suez Crisis was part of the Second Arab-Israeli War, which was an invasion of Egypt by Israel. The United Kingdom and France joined Israel in an attempt to regain control of the Suez Canal. And for people who don't know, the Suez Canal is a 120-mile-long artificial waterway that facilitates trade between Europe and Asia. This connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea through the Isthmus of Suez. During that time, some of the men on another ship loaded one of the guns with ammo after it had already been loaded, causing an explosion that killed 1 man instantly and injured 5 others, who were brought over to the Salem. They died on board the cruiser, so here you have some more deaths. The Salem has seen a lot of death for a ship that never saw any battles.
The Salem had its moment in the Hollywood sun when it was used in the 1956 film The Battle of the River Plate. She portrayed the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee, and no effort was made to cover her distinctive hull number of 139 because in reality, the German Navy often disguised their raider ships to look like neutral ships. And at the time of this battle, the United States was still neutral. In the spring of 1957, the USS Salem's turret number 3 won the coveted Gold E for Outstanding Gun Crew.
I didn't know that each thing could have its own little award, so that was kind of cool.
Neither did I. I'm sure Jared knows that.
I'm sure he does.
The following year, the cruiser was sent to Norfolk to be scheduled for inactivation. The cruiser escaped that by being called up again to travel to Lebanon to help against a coup. But then she did head back to Norfolk, where she was decommissioned on January 30th, 1959. She was berthed in the Atlantic Reserve Fleet in Philadelphia. The Salem was surveyed in 1981 to see if she could be reactivated. She was found to be in excellent condition, but funding to reactivate Salem and her sister Des Moines was not secured from Congress. So she sat some more.
It would be in October of 1994 that the Salem would return to her birthplace, Quincy, Massachusetts. There she became the centerpiece of the United States Naval and Shipbuilding Museum. She was recommissioned 46 years to the day of her original commissioning, May 14, 1995, as a member of the Historic Naval Ships Association. She serves as a museum housing the USS Newport News Museum, the U.S. Navy Cruiser Sailors Association Museum, and the U.S. Navy SEALs Exhibit Room. The Navy Squadron patch for USS Salem is a tip of the hat to Salem and features a witch flying on a broom with a little black cat joining her.
Yeah, I love it.
So cool.
I love it.
I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. We'll have pictures of this stuff up on Instagram. We posted them when we visited the first time, but I'll throw them back up there again. We should have gotten one of the patches for ourselves. I know Jared got one.
We almost did. Remember, he thought he lost his patch in the car or somewhere, and I found it in the cup holder like almost a year later.
That's right. We're like, oh, should we keep it and tell him, oh, that's a bummer you lost it?
You're terrible.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. You've been on a lot of these ships. Do you have a certain area of the ship that's like your favorite to go check out that you want to see on every ship you go on?
Yeah, two places. I love going on the bow of the ship and looking backwards, looking at all the huge guns, the armament and everything, which I just think that's super cool. The Salem was actually it's the only heavy cruiser of its class that got to keep pretty much everything, kept all of its, big guns and secondary guns, anti-aircraft guns. The Newport News and the Des Moines class, they were eventually scrapped, but even before that, they were taking off and cannibalizing parts to use on other ships.
Yeah.
So I love being on the bow and seeing all of that. The second place is being where they, I don't know if they use the same term, but con the boat, where they drive the boat from in that tower overlooking the bow of the ship.
Sure.
It's really, really cool seeing in the Iowa's case, the city below it, and in Salem's case, the big dockyard in front of it.
Yeah.
That's true. The Salem is definitely in a different area than when you go to visit most ships. They're kind of in a lot of places have multiple ships there. Like the Salem is its own little thing, and it's in this dockyard that it took us a minute to even find it because you couldn't see it from beyond like the area that we were in. So we're like, is it back there? Because there were buildings and stuff. And we're like, it doesn't seem like there's a ship back there.
I was kind of sad about it because I feel like it needs a little bit more. It just needs to be celebrated more. It was just in this like weird area where it was very isolated and there were just buildings around it. And I just felt like it should have like a better presentation because it deserves it.
Yeah.
And any big ship of that age deserves it. It
was good. It had a sign towards the front that we're like, well, it's got to be back there somewhere. We'll just drive towards the back and see if we find it.
Yeah. I just loved going down into that area where they had all the posters up of the different types of ships and the models and everything. And you, Jared, were like, oh, yeah, this is X, Y, and Z. And, you were educating us so well. I'm just amazed at your knowledge. I love it. It just made my heart so happy to hear you sharing that information with us.
I just love watching documentaries and reading books about, specifically World War I and World War II, mostly, I guess. Naval time, just shenanigans that went on during that time. There's a lot of shenanigans that did go on, and I think it's really cool to learn about them.
Well, I think it's very cool that it's your passion. I love coming to you and being able to get information from you that I wouldn't necessarily have even known. Hey, Diane.
Yeah?
Would you like to go down a rabbit hole?
Hoppity, hoppity, hop.
Boing.
Hello?
Hello?
We're down here in the rabbit hole.
And we've brought you with us. Have you ever seen Kilroy Was Here?
I'm trying to think if I've ever seen it in person. I don't know that I've ever seen it in person, but of course I'm very familiar with it.
The first time I ever saw it was when I was a child and I was with my mom driving to Long Beach in Southern California to go visit my granny. And it was painted on a wall alongside the freeway. The big nose and hands creeping over. And it said Kilroy Was Here. So I had to ask my mom about it at the time.
Neat.
And now I'm going to tell everyone what that's about.
Cool.
The USS Salem is the home of Kilroy. Kilroy Was Here was a logo that was popular during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The scrawled message was first seen in Europe and the Pacific during World War II. The logo featured a face with a big long nose and two large round eyes looking over a wall with the big nose hanging over the wall. It's quite amusing.
It is.
Hands gripping the top of the wall were also often drawn with the image. This image was usually seen in newly liberated areas. GIs enjoyed leaving the image in places it wouldn't be expected or hard to get into. Hitler actually became obsessed with finding this super spy GI Kilroy. And a story claims a toilet was built for Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin at the Potsdam Conference in 1945, and after Stalin used it, he asked an aide who Kilroy was.
So apparently it was inside the toilet.
The story behind Kilroy is this. James J. Kilroy of Halifax, Massachusetts, was an inspector of the riveting gangs in the Fore River shipyard during World War II, and after he inspected and counted the amount of rivets done by various crews, he would write in yellow chalk on the steel, "Kilroy was here." Most of the time, this message wasn't able to be removed before the ships left Quincy. So that message traveled around the world and became a thing.
Okay, Kelly, how are we going to get out of this hole?
Well, Kilroy does have a really long nose. I wonder if we kind of slapped him up there if we could climb up it.
Hey, Mort, can you throw Kilroy's head over the side of this hole so that his nose can be used to climb up?
This dude is heavy. He's all nose.
Watch out for boogers. It's kind of slippery.
No, it's not.
Actually, it is.
Ugh. The USS Salem is said to be in the top 7 of haunted warships in the world. Travel Channel's Most Terrifying Places featured the Salem in October of 2019. Now, we didn't really feel like we felt anything weird when we were on there.
No, but we weren't really focused
Searching
for
for
that,
ghosts.
I don't think.
I know they do offer tours on the boat, ghost tours. They have a specific little kind of thing that you can pay for, and you can go do investigations on the boat.
Well, he's a docent, right? Don?
Yeah.
He actually investigates with his own team regularly. One of the
Okay.
docents there for the USS Salem.
There are several areas that have quite a bit of activity, with the surgery room being one of the most active. And it's not a very big room at all. They hear the screaming of women and babies crying in here because several women gave birth on the ship after the earthquake. And that's kind of how they have the surgery set up. It's even got the stirrups up.
Yeah, that was one thing I definitely noted.
Yeah, it's horrifying for women to look in that room. The berthing area, and that is BERTH, is where the sailors bunked. And this is where the children who came on board and died seem to have come in the afterlife. Greek nursery rhymes are heard down here. Some of the spirits reputedly here include a burning man who smells of death and hides in the berthing area beneath a third mess hall. This area was once used as a morgue. There's a young Greek girl missing part of her face who may be a 7-year-old spirit visitors call Lucy. Apparently her mother is here with her too, and they dislike another spirit named Robert.
A former ghost tour operator named John still gives tours even though he is dead.
He's got a really great work ethic.
It's a good gig if you can get it. And there are some entities referred to as the Scratchers who like to claw at the legs of visitors. And someone or groups of someones like to bang the freezer near the pantry. Some investigators have used Ouija boards in the mess hall, and the boards have spun on their own. Once, a group asked what the intentions of the spirits there were, and the answer was murder.
Murder.
A trickster ghost named Skip likes to pretend to be other spirits. Latches slam on their own, and chairs have been pulled out and tossed across rooms. And, this is really bizarre, people have heard the drill turning on in the dentist's office.
That's horrifying. For
That's
sure.
terrifying is what I was going to say. I'd be out. Peter Blumberg runs the print shop on the cruiser, which, yes, does actually still run. We actually met him and he demonstrated it for us. It was very, very cool.
He did. I was like, I can't believe that this is still running down here. And you know the pamphlet that they give you when you're going around to do your own self-tour? All printed right there in that print shop.
I know, it's very cool. And I love the smell of the ink.
Yes, it smells like a mimeograph machine.
Exactly. And this gentleman said that he saw a shadowy figure appear down a dark hallway. The figure seemed to stare at him for a while and then descended a stairway.
Yeah, so I was like, yikes. We didn't
Yeah.
see any shadowy figures, but
I'm not really afraid of shadow figures.
no, that's true.
Very first thing I experienced pretty much was a shadow figure. So.
That is true. So the closest you've come to a full-bodied apparition.
Yep. And he was very nice.
He was. YouTuber Exploring with Josh visited the ship in 2022. The caretaker, who also is a tour guide there, is Don DeCristofaro. He is a former naval officer, and he told them that the week before they visited, another group of 3 ghost hunters saw a full-bodied apparition in the volunteers' lounge. Only they didn't know it was a spirit at the time until they asked Don about other people being on the cruiser. It smelled like cigarette smoke in there, and a chair had been pulled out when Don ran in to see what was going on. The guy said that the man was wearing a green jacket. Don has worked at the ship for over 16 years, and he told them that he doesn't feel comfortable going anywhere forward of his office. He says that area feels very dark. His hair used to be much longer because during COVID and he was at home and stuff, he was letting it kind of grow out. So when he came back to the ship, every time he came on the ship, the chief, and that's what they call the spirit that likes to run things there, would yank his hair. Now, apparently the chief was the man responsible for making sure things ran properly on the ship and respectfully, and he likes to hang out in the galley.
You're going, hey, long hair, you better cut this off.
So they're not sure if he was like maybe a head chef, and that's why he likes to hang out in the galley, or what's going on there. And I think we might have met Don. I think he was one of the guys who was sitting at the table who asked if we wanted to be guided or if we wanted to do a self-tour.
Right. I'm fairly certain that was him.
I wish we had watched all this stuff ahead of time, because then we would know who Don was, because everybody who's ever been on the ship has interacted with Don. So I'm like, oh, we could have actually, visited with him and stuff.
And brought our investigation equipment.
Exactly. He probably would have been happy to let us walk around and do some stuff. There were 4 guys on Josh's team, and while they were recording Don giving them a tour of the ship, they captured a dog bark. There is said to be a ghost dog on ship, and she likes to hang out in the barber shop for some reason. And what was really interesting about this exchange is that they all stop and go, did you hear that? The guys are like, wow, that was cool, da-da-da. And then Don just goes right back into his tour. Like, nothing
doesn't
happened.
even faze him.
Nope, doesn't.
The group heard disembodied footsteps and caught several EVP responses. They got confirmation that somebody did die during surgery while investigating the surgical room. They captured the creepiest EVP session we've ever heard, and it scared Josh enough that he was tempted to stop recording.
What did you think of it?
It was pretty bone-chilling. It was just this scream, but it sounded like an angry man, and it happened 3 times.
Yeah, it was pretty chilling to hear this weird screamy sound.
It didn't even sound like a sound to me. It sounded like a person yelling for somebody to,
It almost to me sounded like somebody was frustrated. When you get frustrated, you just go, ah!
Yeah, I think whoever the spirit was wanted them to get out.
Yes. So Kelly explained to everybody how this went.
So on a previous recording, they captured a Class A, we are, and then there was a third word that was unintelligible. So Josh did another session asking if they could repeat what they said after we are. This is when they captured the angry screaming. He asked another question, and there was the angry screaming again. Then an EVP said, get off. And then there was screaming again. So in that one quick session, there were 3 of these screaming sounds. They decided to stop asking the chief for his name because they were so unsettled by the screams. We would have been too, as we said.
Yeah, and I think it's because everybody who goes on board the ship is trying to get his name and he does not want to share it. So I think he just finally gets to a point. And they were really, they weren't being jerks about it, but they just kept asking and asking and asking because everybody wants to be the ones who, we got the name finally.
Right. The spirit was annoyed AF.
Clearly, he definitely sounded annoyed to me.
And they did apologize for irritating him with constantly asking for that name. So that was good. They were trying to be respectful to a certain extent.
And they clearly really did seem like they were scared about this. And I think that's why he was like, maybe I shouldn't record anymore because maybe it's making him angry that we're recording. I'm like, no, I think it's just that you keep asking.
I think it was the repetitive asking for the question. The ovilus said dark, haze, and chief.
Which is clearly what he wants to be called, apparently. So
yeah. And one of the guys saw a person standing in a doorway across from where they were standing. This door led into the hospital, and they had been getting a feeling they were supposed to go into the hospital. When they arrived, the ovilus said, waiting.
So it was like the spirit was in the doorway going, come over here.
Yeah.
Waiting for you.
They did get some really interesting evidence.
Kindred Spirits investigated the ship on their Sea Witch episode in Season 5, and Don joined them and spoke bluntly to the chief to see if they could get some interaction, specifically get him to tell them his name. It seems that Don and the chief don't necessarily get along. Like he said, it pulls his hair, and he feels kind of a dark feeling or whatever. Don had heard when he first got to the ship that there was an angry sailor spirit there that was abusive towards people. So Don decided to lay down the law, and he shouted in the main mess hall, I hear you're a tough guy. I'm a sailor too, and I'm a tougher guy than you ever were, dead or alive, or someplace in the middle, and you should just bring it on.
Oh boy.
A sensitive with the group told Don, oh, he hates you.
Well, duh. You shouldn't come at people like that, spirit or otherwise.
The spirit felt disrespected, and all of a sudden, Don felt as though he were frozen, and he was out of sorts because he doesn't remember anything after that until the sensitive shoved him. He saw that blood was running down his palms because he'd been making such tight fists that his fingernails had cut into his palms.
Yeah. Well, A paranormal investigator named Susan Villegas told Adam her group was sitting at a table getting ready to do an EVP session, and there was a noise that even made Dawn turn ghost white. She had never heard anything like this noise before. I wonder if it was similar to that scream.
Yeah, I wish that she had been able to play that for Adam and we could hear what that it sounded like, but I would think it probably was something similar.
And then she looked off down the space and saw a black shadow figure. She left right after that happened. Suzanne felt that the ship having a haunted house attraction there might have increased the activity and made it more negative. During the investigation, Adam and Amy asked Dawn to interact with the chief, and Dawn said, "You've been screwing around with me for 15 years, but these people are leaving tomorrow and they got no time, so just cut it out and give them your damn name." And they caught a very clear EVP saying, "F you, Dawn."
And they play it on the show, only of course they bleep out that part, but you know that's what's being said.
So far, no one has had luck in catching his name. Amy felt something grab her ankle while they did a remote viewing exercise with Chip Coffee. Chip heard in his head, "If you like the dead, you'll like it here." He also got the message that someone didn't want to be there and was angry. Amy and Adam brought a Greek translator on with them to talk to the children. The children didn't say that they felt unsafe.
Yeah, I thought that was great that they brought on somebody who could talk to them in Greek, because they thought maybe they go into so many of these places where you have an older spirit that's kind of containing the younger spirits and maybe being abusive to them. So they wanted to make sure that the kids were okay. After the investigation, they clearly got a feeling that them having that haunted house attraction on the ship is what was really making Chief angry. Dawn had explained, well, we're not going to do that again. We only did it that one time, but they still had the props and stuff in a room. And so I have a feeling, they didn't show it on the show, but I have a feeling they cleared all that stuff off the ship. And maybe that helped a little bit. I don't know. Ghost hunters investigated the Salem in 2009, and they captured EVPs featuring banging noises and a female voice saying something indiscernible. The guys found that the EMF on the ship was high and that it may be causing hallucinations and extreme paranoia. So that's kind of how they were explaining a lot of the activity going on. Elena and Ash from the Morbid podcast joined YouTubers Sam and Colby for an investigation of the Salem in November of 2022. Kelly, I'd listened to this episode, and we actually had never heard of Sam and Colby until our nephew had started talking about them. And he's
That's
like,
right.
"Do you know these guys?" And I'm like, "No." So I go over and look, and they've got like 9 million people watching them on YouTube. So they're pretty popular. So when they're talking to Elena and Ash at the beginning of the episode, they're talking about some of the places they've investigated. And the girls were really interested in the Villisca Axe murder house because they had done several episodes, a whole series on it. And they wanted to know what was it like. And of course they were like, "Oh, it was, kind of dark in there. And it's, got this really heavy feeling to it." And they were like, "Did you guys stay overnight?" And they were like, "Oh, no way. We wouldn't stay overnight." And I just went, well, those young men may have 9 million people following them, but they didn't stay in the Villisca Axe murder house overnight. Who did?
We did.
We did.
And we didn't feel any darkness or heaviness in there.
I didn't feel anything heavy about that house. We interacted with the children. It felt like a very positive experience. The only thing that was scary about it to me was that nasty smelling bedspread on the one bed that we had to lay on that night.
That is true.
If we had a setup like Dolly, who was in the room with us.
Yeah, she had her sleeping bag and everything. She was good to go.
So Dolly, Karen, Peter, you and I were braver than Sam and Colby because we overnighted in the Villisca Axe murder house.
Yes, indeed.
I'll give us a little badge for that one.
Clearly you are.
So anyway, Elena said that she had something blow what felt like cold air in her ear. I would feel like kind of a spirit was, I don't know if it was trying to get fresh with her or just freak her out.
Maybe just get her attention.
And Elena and Ash seemed to get the bulk of attention from the spirits rather than Sam and Colby. Which makes sense, because if you think about it, the ship was full of sailors who would not see women for a very long time. So anytime you get girls who come on a ship, you might be a little bit more interested in them.
Kind of like me getting in the shower in the jail.
They did get a lot of words on the Ovilus, and the ship seemed pretty active for them.
The USS Salem was built to help renew the naval fleet that had been diminished by World War II, and she did just that for 10 years. She was remarkable and well suited for battles she would never see. And yet she is tinged with death. Are there spirits still wandering the various areas of the cruiser? Is the USS Salem haunted?
That is for you to decide. And Kelly, while we were talking to Jared, we asked him about battles that interested him the most. And I thought people would enjoy hearing this. You can hear it in his voice how excited he is about the different World War I and World War II and such.
He is very passionate, that's for certain.
So when it comes to World War I and World War II, do you have, it's hard to say favorite battles, but battles that you're more interested in than others?
Yeah, I believe it's called the Battle of the Denmark Strait. That was when the German Bismarck, was trying to escape into the Atlantic, which would have been a huge problem. Its goal was to go and target Allied, reinforcements and supply ships, and basically make a lot of trouble for the Allies. And during that battle, the HMS Hood, which was one of the most famous ships for the British Royal Navy, actually got sunk by the Bismarck, and it happened very quickly. And I believe the ship sank within 3 or 4 minutes or something. It was underneath the waves very fast.
Oh my goodness.
I can't even believe that. Do you have a ship that you have not seen yet that you want to visit?
Yeah, too. I'd really like to see the USS Texas, and I'd really like to see the North Carolina.
Well, we definitely would like to return to the North Carolina.
Absolutely.
Is the Texas located in Texas?
It is at the moment. Well, actually, it is all the time, I guess. But right now, it's away from where it's supposed to be because it's having all kinds of fixing going on. It had a lot of rust problems. It was taking on water, and I think it had pumps going 24/7 to pump the water out of the ship. And so, yeah, they raised enough money. I'm not sure if they were just doing like fundraising in Texas or they used some kind of outside sources, but they got enough money and they moved it to a dry dock. And right now it's above the water. It's getting fixed up, and sometime it'll get put back, and I want to go see it when it does.
We definitely are going to make our way up to the USS Salem again and do an official investigation there. We'd love for you guys to check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. It is the time of the year for the History Goes Bump virtual trick or treat.
Yes, indeed.
So please join us in the Spooktacular crew if you'd like to partake in that. If you look at the very top in the featured section, it has all the rules and how you can find the little group there on Facebook and get involved. And then right next to it, up on the featured on the crew as well, is the information about joining us. We have 2 more Zooms coming up for us to record for our anniversary show. We'd love to have you guys join us. We ask a lot of fun questions like, what outfit would you like to be in if you were a ghost and such? And we've already had one of them. We had some great responses to that. So we'd love to have you guys join us on the next 2. We have one on a Sunday and a Saturday, trying to get as many of you involved as we can.
And just know, you don't have to be on camera. We are doing this as an audio thing. It's just most convenient to record on Zoom. So no need to be on camera, but just call in and participate.
Yes. Anita did get back to us. She's the one who had written us about seeing the spirits on that running track that they were on.
Right.
So she dug into it a little deeper, and she said, there doesn't seem to have been a graveyard in this location or any record of an accident where multiple people lost their lives. It was all farmland. I have attached a picture of an old map and highlighted the athletic track area. Directly above is a ring fort, or locally known as the Ferry Fort. There were also 2 schools close by, as Protestant and Catholic students were educated separately. It's very interesting. And she included an article about early medieval farmsteads, and most of them had a ferry fort on them.
And we've covered ferry forts before in an episode, I remember.
I know we've talked about, I think it was on Legends of Fairies. I think we had talked about that. Just really fascinating stuff. Thanks for sharing, Anita. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We'd like to welcome into the cemetery Susan Ellsworth. You're going to be buried in a garden crypt. And in 3 months, you'll be getting your HGB mug.
Thank you so much for supporting the show.
Be sociable. Drop the chain rattling, neck biting, and shape shifting, and join us on Facebook and Twitter at History Goes Bump. Like the page and follow us.
pitcher Cy Young made his major league
Major leg?
major leg.
He's got a big old leg.
He's got a major leg. That's why he was so good.
The Salem was the first American gonna shift my ship.
It shifted over there.
I just shipped my pants.
Oh my
Remember
gosh.
those commercials?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Thanks, Mr. Gasman. All those good commercials. They used to have so much better commercials.
Oh, the
back
commercials nowadays
when.
just suck.
The fire was tamped down quickly, but some men had been injured and were moved to the hospital on board that
He was on that.
other ship.
After the exercises, Salem returned to Boston briefly and then headed over to the Mediterranean. That's how they say it over there, don't you know?
It's like your tongue got tied up in your mouth or something.
It does that all the time.